to disappear there because I have to put my shoes on so that you can actually see me, tall shoes. No airangi a hau, a he nati airangi a hau. He manahuri a hau ki o koto whenua, a ko aku koha ki a koto. Ko oku pūkenga tākuta, me oku pūkenga whakaora. Ko ako tino mahi ko te manaki, me te aki I nā tangata, e noho mauiwi ana, me nā tūroro e mate haere ana. Kia huri a hau ki te kaupapa nei, noku te whiwhi ki te kōrero atu, kia koto mō taku arahikoi, I te ao rangahau, I te ao whakako, me te ao hotutanga anō hoki. Is éireannach ó dúchas mé a rugú agus a tógú in éireann. Tágam go Aotearoa mar chuig de hir, agus na buana a bhronam oribh, ná mar réhanna mar dochtúr leis agus mar chnasaí. Tágam chun cuaram a thuirt do the winter, atá sin nó ag sírú an bháis. Is cúis áthas agus privilege dom an seochanacht, scéalta faoi mo thuras mar bhúntóir, mar haiadóir, agus mar cheanródaí a rinch live. Thank you for the privilege of addressing you this evening. I am from Ireland, and I am of Ireland. I come to Aotearoa as a visitor to your land, and the gifts I bring are my skills and experience as a doctor and a healer. I come to provide a service of care and support to those people who are ill and those who are dying. It is with great delight that I present to you this evening the story of my journey in research, in teaching, and in leadership. So I'm not going to go through step by step, and in fact, William has summarized my whole story, so. But anyway, so now for the reveal. Sco a Kayla a Warren Nadini. If you'd like to repeat, no, you don't have to. In the shelter of each other, the people live. A great whakatoki, an Irish phrase. So I just want to talk about language. I grew up speaking Irish, which is my native language, and English at home. And what I love about language, and the fact that I have two languages, but Irish is my heart and soul, is the way that language reveals what I think is the soul of the people. There's a phrase, ni tir gan changa, or tir gan changa, tir gan anam. A country without its language is a country without its soul. So just as examples, I want to give you a little snapshot of how these two phrases reveal kind of the views of the Irish people who spoke this way. So the first phrase is tá pian orm. So when I'm teaching palliative medicine, I use that phrase to teach this, to talk to the students. And so that's the Irish for I have pain. But if you translated it directly, taking the words, it would be pain is upon me. And so that's how often I feel if I hurt myself and I'm worried, oh my God, that's something, it means something more. In other words, pain can take over you completely. So if you're a person with cancer and you know that you've got bone mets and you suddenly hurt your leg and you think, oh my goodness, this is potentially more cancer, a fracture, a pathological fracture. That pain is not just the physical pain, it's upon you. So that's what I love, how language reveals a way of seeing the world. And the other phrase is a dinalagia. And so that's how the Irish refer to a person who has an intellectual disability, a person with God. So that's a view of, that's how the people, that's their worldview, just their examples. So now, the other word, which I want to use a lot throughout this talk, is buíochas. It's gratitude. So I am so grateful to you all here, grateful to William, grateful to Anna, grateful to Stuart, to Luke, to Anne, and to Leighton for preparing and giving me pastoral care before I gave this talk. So, but the other people that I want to thank, buíochas, is my family of origin. And so I come from a long generation of doctors, and Alana sitting here is the final generation for now. So these are the certificates from my grandfather. 1905, he qualified as a doctor. Just for those who are medical students, their lectures were all in Latin, so that's impressive. So my grandfather, who appears here with my father, who also qualified as a doctor. So my grandfather worked in kind of the very slums kind of Yorkshire as a GP in those days. And this is he with his son, who is my father, who acknowledged, Stuart, the death of your father, and my father died within the last year also. So this is my father qualifying as a medical doctor. He also got an MD, so that it's emotional for me just to put those up. So this is a word that I also love, and it's mishnach. And if you translate it directly, you might say it's courage. But another word for courage in Irish is crogacht. But mishnach for me means that inner well of something, the hope, the spirit, the resilience, that's something else that's more than courage, that's inner part of you. And that's what I gained as a gift from my family. So yeah, you don't recognize me. So cute. Anyway, and that's my father. So he also wore this same outfit. As a doctorate in medicine, it's the Galway academic colours. So from my father, I learned the love of the Irish language. I also learned before, and forgive me if this is not politically correct, but before equity and equality was in vogue or in our lexicon, it was just how he cared for patients. Everyone was equal. And I saw that in action when I observed him in practice as a doctor. So from my father, I also, was in our family, social justice. These things just happened naturally. It was inbuilt. And I said mishnach, courage, that inner spirit, that resilience, that ability to get up when you fall down and keep going. So, and my father was also the president of the Doctors' Union in Ireland, so very much on the side of those who need advocates for them. So then these are my other members of my family, all who became doctors. Seamus on the left, and there's Seamus getting his physician's exams, and my mother and father and brother, who also became a doctor, qualified there, Phelim, and Dervla, who's Alana's mother, and Cleena, my other sister, all qualifying as doctors in Galway. And there's Alana, who's in the third row here, but on the screen, recently qualified as a doctor. So, so there's the gratitude to my family. And then further gratitude now, buchas, to the consultants and the senior doctors in palliative medicine who inspired me. And so we have Michael Carney, who's famous in the world of palliative medicine for a very holistic approach to care of the patient. And the idea that you can die healed, that concept which sounds like a paradox but is real. I learned that from Michael Carney. And then Declan Walsh, who guided me through the Cleveland Clinic Fellowship. He used to correct things with a red pen, and there was on average 50 drafts per paper. So he was, I learned discipline from him. And there's Mary Fallon, Professor of Palliative Medicine in Edinburgh, with whom I worked when I was in Glasgow. Also learned the discipline from her of research and clinical practice, combining both. And Tony O'Brien, a Cork man, and that's okay. But he has had a vision for palliative medicine in Ireland, and he actually 30 years ago ensured that the Ministry of Health at the time and the Department of Health created a mandate for palliative care that has stood the test of time and set Ireland on a great path for having a very high standard of palliative care. So for those for whom I'm very grateful. The other person I couldn't find a photograph was Professor John Welch, Professor of Palliative Medicine in Glasgow, where I did my advanced training. So these are the other people I wish to thank, and some of them are in the audience, and such a privilege to work with the General Medicine Department, and also a privilege to work with and under the compassionate leadership of Elaine Barrington Ward. So my gratitude to the General Medicine Department. It's a privilege to work with you. So despite being a palliative medicine doctor, I actually wanted to be a cardiologist because I love doing echoes as a house surgeon. But anyway, I ended up in the Mater Hospital. It was a major cardiology centre in Dublin and tertiary referral centre. I was a house surgeon there, and this is a slightly more modern version. And the research that I was doing as a house surgeon there, just to show you that things went badly awry after this. So this was on echocardiography. I also then was a rheumatology registrar, so that's the combination. So just to say to you junior doctors, you have to start publishing early, even if you're not the first author. But it was a privilege. And this was the other very complex piece of work. And I remember being a house surgeon, meeting all this family who had this Wolff Parkinson White. So that's my research started. So then, moving to what looks like a very old picture, which it is. So this is it's probably the second in the world hospice to be established. It was founded in 1815. It's in Dublin, Religious Sisters of Charity. They converted their home created 9 beds in 1879. Overcrowding was imminent, so they converted some of their home into a hospice. And with careful planning, negotiating and skillful fundraising, they developed a 110-bed facility with a kitchen, laundry and a dairy. And then it became known for loving care, and conditions were primitive with open fires, candles, hand-washed linen and carbolized mattresses. So that's where I actually had my first encounter with palliative medicine. But this is clearly a much older picture. So when I was a house surgeon, I got an opportunity to do a week-long course in palliative medicine. And what struck me most going around this building was the quietness. And when I asked why it was so quiet for the patients who were there, who were dying, they told me that they had cushioned the flooring. And I remember thinking, if they would cushion the flooring for quietness, this is good medicine, you know, this is good care. So it's a strange thing that that's what has stayed with me. Just to say that the word that I work in or I'm interested in is palliative medicine, and the word palliative comes from pallium, meaning a cloak or a shield. So it's the idea that you're shielding someone in care. You can't actually take away what's happening, but you're cloaking them in care and not abandoning them. So then I moved, as William said, this was going to be my high point, to the United States. And I worked in the Cleveland Clinic, which staggered me not for its cushioned flooring, but the fact that it had a bank, its own police for it, and a Hilton hotel on site. So yeah, it was a different scene. But what a privilege to work there as a clinical research fellow. And despite having all that glamour and probably money, this was the sculpture in the front door at that time, and it simply says, better care of the sick. And so I love the sculpture because of the vulnerability of the two, both the patient or the person and the other person who's on their knees. That's what I think care and being a doctor is about. So the Cleveland Clinic had a World Health Organization demonstration project in palliative medicine, and the first in the United States to have a palliative care center. So as William said, I won the Novice Researcher of the Year award for ASCO. I didn't realize how significant it was, but it was based on the work that I was doing with Declan Walsh, and it was foundational work on the symptoms of advanced cancer with 1,000 patients. It did take 3 years to pull this together. So that has been foundational for further research and development in palliative medicine. And the second part of the doctorate work was published in palliative medicine, and it was on quality of life assessment in advanced cancer. Quality of life assessment was very popular at the time, and we decided at the end of the study that actually just asking one line, how's it going, is as good as giving a fact-G or a multi-choice question. And that's just in summary of the research in one line. So as a result of this work, I then got my doctorate in medicine in Galway and wearing the same outfit as I am now. And it was, such an honor. So then I went to Our Lady's Hospice in Harold's Cross, which I've just shown you the 1879 picture of with the dairy, the cattle outside. And here I was a registrar and in clinical practice, but I also got a half day a week to do my research. So having done all that hard work and doing very rigorous research, I then went to the Department of Folklore in Dublin. So this is, while I was in Cleveland Clinic, I connected with PhD students in education who were enthralled and enthralled me with qualitative research. And that opened my eyes to what actually a p-value may not be that helpful, but actually someone's experience is valuable. So in Ireland, in Dublin, there is a national folklore collection because in the 1920s they realized that people's memories of old traditions was going to be lost. So they asked pupils at schools to write down the stories in copybooks. And in fact, that collection of the stories dating back from the 1930s is part of a World Heritage National Folklore Collection. It's inscribed into the UNESCO Memory of the World Register with other things such as the Magna Carta and the Diary of Anne Frank. So I spent several afternoons, or several weeks, if not months, going through these old school books and digitized material, looking at what do they say about dying. Because I was all excited, new palliative medicine, it's a new term, I'm on the brink, I'm a pioneer, I've got, but actually, it just occurred to me, thousands of years people have been dying, so they seem to know. So that was a wake-up call. So then I thought, well, let's listen to what the people have to say. What have they written, and what did they say? So what I wrote in one of the articles was subsequently published. The warm welcome for modern advances in the care of dying should not exclude the past, in which there is much to be learnt from the skills of our ancestors. So this was a bilingual study. Skipping along, having collected as much material as I could from these records, I then decided to go out to the west of Ireland and interview people who had memories of traditions, and to do that in Irish and English. So I wrote that there's knowledge to be acquired and wisdom to be gained by reflecting on the positive aspects in the care of the dying practiced by our ancestors as it evolved over hundreds of years. So some of the things that emerged, the people in the past used sips of poitín, which you might have heard of, and it was used to numb the pain. And they were constantly wetting the mouth, using a drop of brandy. A little quill was used to wet the lips. It was important to hold the hand. They were aware of the ramblings that happened prior to someone dying. They were very familiar with the signs of impending death, such as the death rattle. So we are saying that we have all the knowledge and skills, when in fact they had it all then as well. As professionals caring for the dying, we have much to learn from our ancestors' skills and attitudes. And this is the warning. By our very expertise and professionalism, we may be disempowering the dying person and their natural carers, who as unpracticed amateurs we could sideline. So then I moved to do my advanced training. Oh, by the way, that was published in Palliative Medicine, which is considered a very good journal in the world of palliative medicine. And I think Cicely Saunders was one of the reviewers for that article, so that was good. So then moving to Scotland, which I continued my advanced training in palliative medicine, working in Glasgow with Professor Welch and Mary Fallon. Again, I got non-clinical time to do research, and once again I headed off to the west coast of Scotland and did the same thing, but not in Scots Gaelic, it was in English. So, but again, looking for the same thing. What are the stories these people had? And they still speak in their original native indigenous language. So in that language will reveal their philosophy towards dying. And that's what I was fascinated by and interested in, to teach us now. So I didn't land in a helicopter, or a plane, but I went to Skye and Barra, and it was subsequently published. A little story from Barra, which was, it's an island off the west coast of Scotland. When the person dies, now this is a while ago, the straw bedding was set alight. So the bed was made of straw. And people working along the seashore, they saw the smoke and flames, and they knew that their neighbour had died. That they stopped work there and then and prayed where they stood on the macher, which was their word for it. So that was, I think, a beautiful image. And then there were no flowers on these islands, they're quite isolated. So they created a shroud for the person who had died, and all the participants described it as beautiful. And it was made without just using a scissors and no stitching, and the women sat around the bed with white linen or cotton, and they made this shroud. Just as the pharmacology of analgesic therapy warrants rigorous study and research to advance palliative medicine, in my view, so the unknown territory of the moment of death should be explored. So I'm just going to skip along. and make it easier for you. So now I return to Ireland, to Limerick, and I was the first consultant in palliative medicine there, the 5th in Ireland. And the population that I served with one house surgeon was 350,000. And we covered, yeah, so that was, so I'm used to working hard. And while I was there, I suppose I got interested in that idea of the moment of death. And I had now the opportunity, as registrars eventually came through, to explore that. So just as I was saying in the past, the moment of death was so significant culturally, language-wise, philosophically. So what's happening now? What's happening to the moment of death at home or in the hospice or in a hospital? So this was a study. Now it's interesting that at this stage I'm only getting published in Mortality, which is unfortunate. But anyway, so I'll just give you one of the descriptions of the family. So we interviewed 10 families about their experience of the moment of death at home. So Ned Murphy, it's a Ned Murphy interview. 7 women are in position around the bed where Ned is dying. His wife, 4 daughters, his sister, and a home care nurse. He looked at Mam. Ned, you know it's time to go. Look at the light. The light will guide you into your new life. I hope you have a great time. We love and will miss you. Goodbye. The 4 daughters realised their apprehension, having not experienced death before. This is their words. It's going to be so monumental, but when it did happen, we were building up to it slowly and it seemed so natural. They emphasised the finality of the last breath. There was one more breath and he was gone. The moment that he left was so obvious he was gone. There's only one moment of death because you're 100% yourself until you die. You aren't half a person. You aren't any less. He wasn't any less of who you were apart from being a sick person, but suddenly that was gone. He was 100% gone. They described themselves as non-religious, but the sisters said, or the daughters, they were keenly aware of the extraordinary nature of the death of their father. We were feeling it very strongly, detached sort of emotion, almost unreal. That piercing grief we felt when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Now it was almost like you knew you were in the middle of something extraordinary, but slightly detached. It was almost too big to cope with. They realised, in their words, the sense of detachment, the sense of closure. It was intimacy. They were totally present to their father. And they said, I wasn't aware of anybody else apart from myself and Dad. For those 2 minutes, it was me, just me looking at Dad. I wasn't looking at the candle, but just for those 2 minutes, it was just something suspended. Mam put the candle in Dad's hand. We all instinctively put our hand out on Mam's. So that's just to give you an example of the material that you can get through qualitative research and the value to me of that, of capturing that. So then once again, Mortality publishes a relative experience of the moment of death in a tertiary referral hospital. So this is all, this is in Limerick also. And Jodie Batley, the co-author, is a palliative medicine physician in Nelson. So this is about being in hospital, and in particular, family praised the humanity, compassion, and professionalism of nurses and doctors. So it's more a serious deficit if humanity, professionalism, and compassion are lacking and the environment is impeccable. The environment in a hospital is not impeccable, but if you have that humanity, professionalism, and compassion present, you've got a lot. So this then, while in Limerick, as William said, I started to make documentaries. And this is a lovely documentary which is on Vimeo, and it's entitled A Child's Grief. And it just involved children, their only children, telling the stories of the death of their mother, or the death of their friend, or yes, their mother or their father or a friend. So this person on your left, that little girl is explaining, that's her memory box which the social worker helped her to make as her mother was dying. Her father had already died by drowning. And she tells in the stage, she said, Helen was a social worker, she said the social worker said Mam was going to die soon. And I thought it was like in a while soon, but it was now soon. So very simple, but I get enthralled by the beauty of these descriptions. And in this, and then similarly in the same documentary, a 12-year-old girl whose mother had died said, I feel different. She was saying, I'm different from the other people in my class. I feel I know more, I know about death. So profound from such young people. There's another documentary made in New Zealand. Some of the participants are in the audience. And we've used this documentary in a workshop style for the last 10 years for teaching medical students about the experience of families. Because we as palliative medicine doctors hear so much stories of the families, we hear them directly, but how do we get them out there to a bigger audience? And that's what excited me about making documentaries. And then I moved a little bit from my palliative care world over to the Wairarapa and made a documentary which was shown on Maoriland Film Festival. And this is, this is kind of my leadership in community, inspired by this group of people who, despite all the odds, explored their spirituality in unique ways, challenging ways, and yet created this community. So I made a documentary about them. And making a documentary is hard work. It takes 3 years. I think I'll never do this again, and then I do it again. But the part that I love is this part, when I hop in and I get flowers at the end and people say it was great. So it's worth it all for that. That little picture may feature again. So this is another documentary made, and it's the story of our Challenge 2000. Again, there's some people from this social justice group in the audience, and we made this documentary a few years ago. So in suburban Wellington Kitchen in 1988, a handful of people had the idea of establishing a community-based organisation to help young people and their whānau. Their vision was the image of a house where those who have enough will come through the back door and those with nothing will come through the front door. Inside they will meet and help each other. So that year they started in a one-room office above Kentucky Fried Chicken in Johnsonville. And in this documentary, people have been helped by Challenge 2000. They tell their stories. And that was shown on Maori television. And again, I feature. And then that was again non-palliative care, a beautiful topic to explore. And most recently then, a new documentary to replace the 10-year-old one, which will be used in workshop with medical students and multidisciplinary, anybody who wants it to use it. And it's been available on Whakaata Maori Plus. Again, it tells the stories of families who've experienced dying at home or in the hospital, in the emergency department, and the care they provided. And again, the phrase, it's the way we care. So the environment doesn't have to be impeccable, it's the way we care. So, just skip along now. I may have skipped something. So now I move to New Zealand, and this is Wellington Hospital, and I carry on with Michelle Dixon, who's a haematology consultant. She was a registrar at the time. And we explored what is it like, not just for families when someone dies in hospital, what's it like for the staff? So if you take the same moment and take the doctor, the nurse and the family, interview them after the death, obviously, and ask them, describe what happened then, and the stories will be different. And I think it's important that we know the experience for each person. So I'll give you one example of a family. A family, their father had just died, and this is the daughter. And the daughter was distressed over hearing a nurse on the phone describe her father as a body to go to the morgue. So this is a nurse on the phone, the person has just died, and just said, the body to go to the morgue. And the daughter says, it's like, hey, it's not a body, it's my dad. It's the man I love, you know. And she was further upset by this big silver trolley that came along. It brings the bodies to the mortuary. And there's a picture of that. And she said, they're not going to take Dad down to the morgue just like that, are they? It looks like a meat van. She then had to run with her 81-year-old mother after the orderlies as they quickly wheeled her father's body to the mortuary. So at the moment of death in hospital, it's disturbing how easily the needs of patients and families can be neglected. In the hospital setting, leadership, competence and compassion are required to ensure prioritised care of the dying patient and their family. So this is another with Alex Sirides, SMO in ICU, and we then looked at the experience of families and nurses and doctors in ICU. Very briefly, it's interesting that the doctors in ICU regretted the fact that they stayed outside the curtain, outside the room, and watched the monitor as the person was dying versus the nurse being at the bedside. So they found that hard. Just a simple little observation. It was published in the Quarterly Journal of Medicine. So then, this is an interesting idea. The patient dying in hospital, an honoured guest in an honoured place. Imagine that. Imagine patients being honoured guests and hospitals being an honoured place. So this title is adopted from, you probably have to read that just, the title is adopted from an inspiring essay by Ken Warpole, you see here, commissioned by the Irish Hospice Foundation. He reviewed the architecture and design of hospital spaces in which the dying find themselves. The idea of hospital being an honoured place with dying patients as honoured guests opens a new window into our daily reality of working in hospital. So this is a radical approach. How do we behave towards other people within the hospital environment? How do staff show they care for the dying patient and grieving family? How can we make time for the dying patient and family? How can senior doctors and nurses show leadership and model compassionate and competent behaviour? Are the dying patients and their families our honoured guests? Are the hospitals in which we work honoured places? But the beauty of doing some of this work is that it led to a change, and there's the meat van over there on the left, which is the mortuary trolley. And arising from that work has come this Te Wai project, which involves quilts made by Wellington quilters or some by hospital staff, and that covers the mortuary trolley, and every ward has its own quilt. So, and this is the Te Wai symbol, which has arisen from all that work I did and we did on the experience of dying in hospital. So this symbol is put up outside the door when someone dies, so that we as staff recognise that another human being has died. That's all we need to do. We don't need to be told anything. And it's also on the nurses' station. And we were gifted that name. And what's beautiful about this is it's had no funding, and it's got further and further support from the people on the ground, from those of us who are working day in, day out. So then I moved from palliative medicine to general medicine, and I went to the morning handover, which I thought, oh my goodness, this is different from palliative medicine. So as a result of the shock of I suppose the amount of work that has to be transferred over several minutes or 20 minutes. So we decided, and some of the Dorothy's here in the audience, to examine that time, and we interviewed about 50 doctors and doctors, junior doctors and senior doctors, about what's that experience like to be in that room, that 20 minutes, when they're handing over all the patients who've come in overnight, the speed of it, the intensity of it. And very briefly, the way that meeting will work depends on two pillars. One is structural, that there's a structure to the meeting. There's someone in charge, they're following a list. So that's over there on your left. But equally important pillar is relational, how we treat each other at the meeting. The leadership style, the collegiality, the sensitivity, the acknowledgement, the sense of responsibility. So again, what I love about this research, qualitative research, is just the opportunity to find out this kind of material, the relational, the experiential. So, just to go on to COVID, which you, I'm sure, have not forgotten about. The elderly and COVID-19, cocooning or culling, the choice is ours. So this is an opinion piece that I wrote. In response to this, an English newspaper journalist suggested coronavirus could prove mildly beneficial to the English economy by killing off the elderly. In his column, Jeremy Warner, I had his picture up, but I thought it wasn't fair to him to put it there. So, in his column, Jeremy Warner analysed the USA making an emergency interest rate to cut to protect the economy against coronavirus. He compared coronavirus with the Spanish flu and how the 1918 epidemic disproportionately affected young people, unlike the COVID-19 strain, which primarily kills the elderly. Warner reasoned Spanish flu had a lasting impact on supply because it killed off primary breadwinners, which he said is unlikely to happen with coronavirus. Then he added, not to put too fine a point on it, from an entirely disinterested economic perspective, the COVID-19 might even prove mildly beneficial in the long term by disproportionately culling elderly dependents. So that's kind of the antithesis of what medicine is about and what I'm about. But the Ireland's Taoiseach, which is the Prime Minister, spoke at that time, not in response to this. He said, at some stage in the coming weeks, the government will advise the elderly to stay at home for several weeks, and systems are being put in place to ensure they have food and are checked on. He told the country the measure would save many lives, particularly the most vulnerable, the most precious in our society. We call it cocooning. So me, having watched the scenes of the heroic work of doctors around the world, I was reminded sharply, and this is me talking, I was reminded sharply this Easter weekend to spend more time with the elderly, frail, non-COVID patient who has motor neuron disease, with the frightened, older, non-COVID patient living alone and overwhelmed by neuropathic pain. This pandemic has forcibly reminded me of my humanity and my duty to be exquisitely careful with the lives of others. Cocooning or culling, the choice every day is ours. So this is research more recent, done with Simon Walker from Bioethics in Dunedin. Again, qualitative research exploring what it's like to be a first-year doctor looking after patients who are dying. And so a recurring challenge for them through their first year or two to work as a doctor is being responsible for the decisions, knowing that what they do can have life and death consequences. And the participants in this study, what I did was I interviewed 13 doctors 4 times every 3 months and developed a research relationship with them. And they told me the stories of the things that were happening and what was challenging in caring for patients who were dying. And often they were at night when they were on a long day and didn't have as much support. The participants, young doctors, frequently described senior doctors as an important source of support, and the lack of such support as leading to moral distress and demoralisation. So then I decided to take this further and explore how to support these junior doctors, and that work is ongoing. But just to say, this summarises a little bit what I have found by interviewing senior doctors. So I, having finished that, got published, was very happy with myself, and thought, yeah, senior doctors should be helping junior doctors, you know, why don't they get with the programme? And then I started interviewing, I forgot that I was a senior doctor, then I started interviewing senior doctors, and I realised actually they themselves are heavily burdened by their past experience of ethical issues, caring for patients at the end of life, and they're burdened by their memory of things that happened as junior doctors and ongoing as senior doctors. The level of distress described by surgeons in the study we're doing is of great concern. On a daily basis, they're required to make life-altering decisions about patients in complex clinical scenarios. So what I found is that the junior doctors and the senior doctors, what they would most value is having time to acknowledge these challenging events, time to share their common humanity, and time to reflect together on these events. Whereas a doctor may comfortably sit within their professional mode, prescribing antibiotics, performing an endoscopy or a coronary angiography, nevertheless, facing the death of another human being will challenge our own sense of self. It is difficult to remain professionally armoured while faced repeatedly with the dying and death of fellow human beings. The death of a patient is a person. It's not just a clinical event, a physiological experience, nor just an administrative task for the junior doctor to certify. It involves an encounter with a major existential reality for human beings. Yet we present it to junior doctors as a task: certify the death, complete the death documents, and thereby distance ourselves from what the junior doctor might experience. So now moving on from death to David Seymour. So no, that was not death to death. This will have to be edited. I always, each time I challenge myself, I was on the plane going to Auckland for this interview thinking, why did I say yes to this? This will kill me. But just to say, yeah, I spent 10 years with, and some people are in the audience, with Care Alliance and John Kleinsman and many others, advocating not to include doctors in the practice of euthanasia-assisted dying. And this interview live on television on a Sunday morning nearly killed me. But partly why it nearly killed me is if you look at those little wheels on that chair that I'm sitting on, they told me as I was about to have the interview, don't move a millimetre back or you'll fall off. So, besides the fact that both David Seymour and I had to be escorted through different ways out of the studio so that we didn't meet, it was a very challenging time. Very challenging. And I suppose the only message in this is if you believe in something, you go to the very end to fight for what you believe, irrespective of the outcome. Another good point of this was I had been made up by a professional beautician prior to, and that was worth it. But just to say, since assisted dying has been brought into New Zealand, there's a group of us doing research by interviewing during its first year, we interviewed 40 palliative care doctors and nurses, social workers and chaplains, and asking them what's the impact on their experience or their practice of palliative care. And it's very interesting what's emerged, and that will hopefully be published in the near future. So even though what I advocated for didn't emerge, we carry on by doing research and fighting for what we believe in. I've had the privilege, and Willem mentioned this was the exhibition that was held, and Lucy Elkin may be in the audience, so Lucy was the other palliative medicine doctor who involves teaching medical students. Lucy and Eileen prior to that, Eileen's in the audience. This is an opportunity. Anyway. So anyway, this is the work that the students do as a reflection on their visit to a patient under palliative care. And then we have an exhibition every few years, which requires a lot of work. And Willem opened it for us this year. Just to say, the creativity can help us gently reach the deepest places. So why we're saying is that this is a valuable exercise for the students to create art as a way of reflection of a visit to somebody who's facing their dying. So creativity can help us gently reach the deepest places. Meeting death up close challenges our sense of self, opening up the door to an existential mystery and the depths of our inner world. Putting students in touch with their creative sides gives them a gift they can return to in their future careers as professionals caring for the sick, the wounded, the vulnerable and the dying. The work of a doctor in service to humanity is not a light load. So we must learn ways of restoring ourselves throughout the journey. So this program of work with the student is like a seed planted in the student's experience to which they may turn for nourishment in the future. And so, closing slowly but surely, this is a lovely picture. I was in one of the pictures, but I left that one out. So now it's a lovely picture. And it's the future of palliative medicine in Wellington, all young registrars and one recently appointed consultant in palliative medicine, with Johnny Mayer, who's here with Bonnie from the Simulation Suite. So we've created a new education program involving simulation and mannequins. Who would think that plastic mannequins would help you learn about palliative care? But so it does. So Molanoig agus Chuckishe is a lovely whakatoki in Irish, meaning praise youth and they will flourish. So what a great privilege to work with the future of palliative medicine. So in slow conclusion, this is a book by Phil Simmons, as it says here, Learning to Fall. Phil Simmons was 35 years old when he learned he had Lou Gehrig's disease or motor neuron disease. He was a professor of English, and so he decided to recount his story of his last few years in a book. So, and as he writes here, now I find myself in late August with the nights cool and the crickets thick in the fields. Already the first blighted leaves grow scarlet on the red maples. It's a season of fullness and sweet longings, made sweeter now by the fact that I can't be sure I'll see this time of the year again. And he says, maybe too my interest in edges is personal. I stand at the edge of a life made shorter by illness and can't help being pulled out of the present moment into mourning my losses, counting my fears. I sigh over my lost prowess as a hula dancer. I fear for the day when I will be unable to lift a spoonful of lime jelly to my lips. And he said, but we all stand at the edge. The present moment is itself an edge. This evanescent sliver of time between past and future. We're called away from it continually by our earthly pleasures and concerns. Even now you may be thinking it's time for another cup of coffee and one of those blueberry muffins. Seems it's always time to be doing something other than what we're doing at the moment. While reading in your chair, you find yourself thinking about last night's argument with your spouse. You're thinking that it's time to rake leaves, check your email, get some sleep, get to work, pick up the kids, water the chickens, exercise the gerbils. The present moment, like the spotted owl or the sea turtle, has become an endangered species. Yet more and more I find that dwelling in the present moment, in the face of everything that would call us out of it, is our highest spiritual discipline. More boldly, I would say that our very presentness is our salvation. The present moment entered into fully is our gateway to eternal life. This is the author and the man facing his own death. And so, in conclusion, attention, observation, and listening, the core of what it is to be a doctor and the core of what it is to do research, the core of leadership, the core of teaching. Recently, a fifth-year student, his name is Aidan, but I'm just so there it's out there, Aidan. You just have to imagine the scene. I'm standing in a ward, which isn't in the new part of the hospital, and the patient is dying and has been dying for a few weeks. She's very thin, gaunt. She has this smile that stretches definitely from ear to ear, and she's dying slowly of lung problems, but she's comfortable. She's nestled in pillows, and her son, adult son, is on one side. The lady is in her 80s, and Aidan is on the other, and I'm just standing there. We've come to visit her, and I say to her, "Are you thirsty?" And so Aidan takes up the sponge, the blue sponge, dips it in water, and she sucks on it. And that moment for me is infinity. It's everything I would want for Aidan, for me, for every... So that is a moment of attention, observation, listening. So Marie-Thérèse Southgate was deputy editor of JAMA, and she wrote about the relevance of painting to the practice of medicine. And this is what she said. Firstly, they share a common goal, the goal of completing what nature has not. Each is an attempt to reach the ideal, to complete what is incomplete, to restore what is lost. Secondly, the practitioners of each have something in common. The first is observation, keen observation. Even more important than the first, because it determines the quality of the first, is the necessity of attention. Attention does not seek anything, nor does it impose itself on what is before it. It simply waits in a state of readiness to receive, and what it receives is the truth of the object before it. In the end, both art and medicine are about seeing. One looks first with the eyes of the body, next considers with the eyes of the mind, and finally, if one remains in this vision, if you're patient enough and still enough, we begin to hear as well, somewhere deep in the depths beyond where words are formed. It is in this same wordless language of the human spirit that the physician sees not just a disease, nor even a patient, but the person. It is in that moment that healing begins. Paradoxically, the healer is healed as well. That perhaps is the art of medicine. Kia ora, Gurumila Margaret. Thank you.
Godhui feni shellig mer love, Sujil to leishna God thee, or Rosh